Welcome to VPG's Virtual Water Cooler Chat Podcast, a platform that features professionals across a variety of industries and promotes growth mindset principles with a central pillar of championing the achievements of women. Our conversations explore a wide spectrum of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, creating a vibrant mosaic that enriches our collective understanding and strengthens our commitment to growth and empowerment.
Today, in a special collaboration with ADAPT.legal, guest interviewer Shirley Fung and VPG Founder Ashley Cheung are speaking with National Medal Laureate Rory Cooper, Ph.D., PLY. Shirley Fung is the co-founder and patent agent of Akona IP. With both a bachelor's and master's from MIT in electrical engineering and computer science, she has honed her expertise across various organizations, including Big Law in Boston, boutique IP firms in the Netherlands and the US, and a global semiconductor leader. Dr. Cooper is the founding director of the Human Engineering Research Laboratories, a joint center of the University of Pittsburgh and U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. He has authored or co-authored over 400 peer-reviewed journal publications and authored or co-edited several books, including the award-winning Care of the Combat Amputee. With over 30 patents awarded or pending, Cooper is an elected member of the National Academy of Engineering and Fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, and was awarded the National Medal of Technology and Innovation by President Biden, and inducted into the 50th class of the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Let's get started.
Good afternoon, Dr. Cooper and Shirley. Thank you so much for being here today. And this is such a special collab. I really appreciate both of you be present. Today is actually really special because we are having two hosts on this podcast. Usually it's just me, or sometimes I'll have like my young ones to do that. They are actually doing better job than I do sometimes. That's the power of the next generation. So today we are actually doing the two parts. Virtual Patent Gateway is going to take the first portion, and then Shirley from Akona IP, she is also an ADAPT.legal communications team, and so am I. So we've just thought that it would be really super cool to introduce an inductee from the 50th class of National Inventor Hall of Fame, another celebrity today.
Thank you, Ashley and Shirley. It's a pleasure to be with you. And not sure I count as a celebrity, but I'll try to do my best.
Well, you are. I'm going to start with my portion first. After that, I will turn over the floor to you.
Sounds great.
So the first thing first, welcome. And I first learned about you because I needed to find a inductee from the National Inventor Hall of Fame that can actually be a panelist at the PTAB Bar Association. And that was this year in March. I knew some people from the USPTO, and they were giving me a list of people that I can potentially contact, and I looked up, and your name came up twice in a row. So I was like starting to do some research. The thing that actually made you most memorable, not only your accomplishment, it's about your resilience. So I learned about your accident. And then you still continue with like your mission of like innovating. So would you mind talking about your story behind that? I mean, it's not every day that we see people that have such resilience. When you talk about resilience, you are taking it up to a whole new level. So do share.
Yeah, I mean, I joined the Army when I was 17 years old, which was a few years ago. And I'm an Eagle Scout, now distinguished Eagle Scout. And my father was also in the Army, and some uncles and great uncles. And so there was a history of service in my family. A lot of the Scout leaders were also veterans. And I grew up in a small town, and it was an opportunity to serve, to maybe see a little bit of the world, and to help make it possible to get an education, to go to college. I enlisted in the Army when I was in high school, and I got the good fortune to be assigned in Germany during the Cold War and during sort of the height of the terrorist activities in Germany, which a little more the challenging part. Probably the best part of it was I met my wife, Rosie, and we've been married now for over 40 years. And she's also a Pitt faculty member. Hopefully for both of us was the highlight of my military career. Then, unfortunately, I was doing physical training, what we call in the Army PT. So not like at the university we call PT physical therapy, but we call physical training. And during that, I was run over by a truck, actually sideswiped by a bus and then run over by a truck. And I had multiple internal injuries, but the most severe and lasting injury was a spinal cord injury that left me with lower extremity paralysis. But fortunately, through the miracles of medical care, and at that time, the CAT scan was early, and so was orthoscopic surgery. And so that saved my life. And when I got back to the United States and got out of rehab from the VA, I had to figure out what I was going to do. And so I decided I would sort of accelerate my plans to go to engineering school. And I enrolled at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and started in both electrical and mechanical engineering. But I later dropped the mechanical engineering part and completed a degree in electrical engineering through the use of the GI Bill and other VA benefits. And I was very fortunate because, one, my Rosie stayed with me. I had great support of my friends and family, and I had great support of Vietnam veterans who were also young people at the time, and some were still in college, and others were just kind of coaching me how you adapt to civilian life and how you adapt to disability. And I had a peer mentor, Tim Davis, who was a Marine vet from Vietnam, was also just still an amazing person, made a great impression on me early on. I had a great undergraduate advisor. A lot of people, their undergraduate advisor just more or less sort of signs up on what courses they take and make sure that they're on progress towards their degree. But mine was more this was pre-Americans with Disabilities Act, so he was there to make sure that I was able to access the curriculum and access the labs and get the best education I could. And I was lucky the students that I worked with were also just remarkably welcoming and open to. So I know that's not everybody's experience, but that I think for me made it, it still made a great impression on my life. And I got also introduced to wheelchair sports. I went to the National Veterans Wheelchair Games and started competing in the National Wheelchair Games, and eventually went on to the Paralympic Games. And I still compete in the National Veterans Wheelchair Games. Now I'm, kind of expected to go and mentor the young folks, and there's people that just want to see that I'm still there. That's a lot of fun. So I had a great experience. I started building wheelchairs and making them better in my parents' machine shop. They had an automotive machine shop. I was able to do some stuff there. I had a lot of support from my mother, my grandfather, and then the university let me, even though I was in electrical engineering and for a while mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, and other departments were also pretty helpful. Let me play with carbon fiber, learning about lightweight materials and different processes. Yeah, just kind of fortunate that a bad situation led me down a different path, and I got a lot of support to continue to explore my interests in creating better technology.
I love the fact that you just keep playing with all kinds of engineering. You've named a couple.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, that's, a lot of inventors are like that. I'm sure that Shirley's witnessed that too. Matter of fact, one of the things I love about the National Inventors Hall of Fame and the members is that most of them are just really nice, creative people that are trying to solve problems for themselves or for others, usually themselves and others. And they do the same thing, right? I'm willing to adopt ideas from other fields, other disciplines, constantly trying to learn what's new and what's emerging. And that's what engineers are, right? We're basically problem solvers.
Would you mind sharing with us how you started the Human Engineering Research Lab, HERL, at the University of Pittsburgh? And what is your two-part question? So how you get started on HERL, and also what is your philosophy of innovation and leadership?
I'll start with the first. So when I was a graduate student, I noticed that all the labs were kind of siloed. Professor X had a lab here with a couple of graduate students, and Professor Y had another lab with a couple of graduate students. And one thing that was interesting, though, is all of us graduate students at UC Santa Barbara, we would go to the little Mexican restaurant on campus, and they serve cheap chili on Fridays. We would go there and we would talk. And oftentimes we would say, we could help solve each other's problems, because my interest was more on the control systems and system side, and also in the biomedical engineering side. And somebody else would be like doing computer engineering or computer science side, and others would be doing electrical engineering, more pure, some robotics. And the thing about engineering sometimes, and I think about inventing, is that you get different perspectives, even within engineering, even more so now that at the University of Pittsburgh, I work with many more disciplines. People have different approaches to problem solving and different knowledge or skill sets. And so we would work together. And I got the idea then that if I ever had my own lab, I want to work in teams with different disciplines and remove those barriers. And so I first got the chance at Cal State University in Sacramento, where I created the HERL lab, the Human Engineering Laboratories, because the dean said we couldn't include research in any of our laboratories' names. When I moved to Pittsburgh, we added the R. My wife thought that was a compliment to her because she didn't call it HERL, she called it her lab. If you ever come to visit HERL, we don't have individual investigator, individual faculty labs. We have common shared facilities that are run by professional staff, and that the faculty and the graduate students and the other trainees, they use those labs as they need to advance their research and development projects. And the idea is that we also work in teams of teams, so it depends on the project. We may be one group of people working on it for another project, another group of people, and they can actually even swap during the different times. I wanted to do that because I thought we could get different perspectives to bear, so you could have physicians and physical therapists and occupational therapists and statisticians and engineers of different types working together, and you would be able to solve more complex problems and solve them more efficiently. So when I came to the University of Pittsburgh, and the other thing is I did my postdoctoral fellowship in Chicago at the Hines VA, which is a large VA medical center. And it's also got as a spinal cord injury program and polytrauma program and other things. So I got my introduction to being a VA researcher. So the beauty about Pittsburgh is we have the VA Pittsburgh healthcare system, which is a strong research program and a great clinical care program where I also get my own clinical healthcare. And then we have the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon University, and the UPMC health system. So there's a lot of resources. And now even in HERL, we're in the midst of our summer internship program with students from Carnegie Mellon and Robert Morris University and Duquesne University and other universities across the country to try to promulgate that model of different institutions working together, different disciplines working together, different perspectives, and people with different life experiences. Even now we bring in veterans and non-veterans and people from different majors and people from different life experiences in different parts of the country. And I think that's one of our strengths. So that's in such our philosophy of innovation as well, as that you bring different perspectives, different life experiences, some professional skills together to solve problems in teams. And then you try to keep a fairly flat organization so that everybody has a chance to say something and contribute and feels like they're heard. And that's kind of my philosophy of leadership. I learned a couple things when I went to the Non-Commissioned Officers Academy in the Army, which was, if you take care of your people, they'll take care of you, and then also just to listen. And so that's another, I think, one of the strengths of HERL. We listen to what people have to say, and good ideas could come from anybody. You don't want to create such a hierarchy that you miss those good ideas, because the others run the risk that the director's ideas are the good ideas and everybody else has to put their ideas aside. And that's how you get to be pretty stale pretty fast. So, and then I also like the idea of rotational leadership. At different parts of the project, somebody else who's the most qualified to do that actually leads the project. So I might be the principal investigator on the grant, but I'm not leading all aspects of the project or all phases of the project. So I think that also makes us strong too. And it gives people an opportunity to shine and to put their own stamp on things as well.
And you actually allow people the opportunity to shine. Sometimes, well, a lot of times they actually surprise you, because just like the interviewing process, when I have some of the young ones, I would go through prep with them. So at the beginning, I would basically draft your questions, and then we'll go through prep. The first time, they usually have no idea what I'm going to say. So they go through the question as if I'm the interviewer and then the guest. And then so I would actually make up answers. I'll just make up answers and go through the process. So they would actually feel like the simulation, right? And at the end of it, it's like, do you know the guest? I'm like, no, I completely just made all of this up. It's like, you have an amazing ability to make things up. I'm like, yeah, I kind of do. And sometimes if I don't, if I'm really tired, it's like, okay, well, blah, 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 just move on. So we go through the process. But that's amazing. I really like the fact that you mentioned about rotational leadership. One thing that I wanted to talk about is the pleasure of having you, Braxton, and Meredith on our panel. That was Innovative Leadership with Purpose. And I think that we had a lot of fun. One thing that I wanted to have our audience also have a chance to listen, because they were not at the panel, is to have you talk talk about the Kirigami wheelchair and the principle behind that?
Yeah, so actually the Kirigami wheelchair is not just a wheelchair, it's multiple wheelchairs. It's actually, a Kirigami is an engineering and design process. So first, most people are familiar with origami, which is folding of paper into different shapes. And Kirigami is cutting and folding flat materials into 3D shapes. And Kirigami engineering is using cutting and folding engineering materials like metals or could be cloths or composites to make flat materials cut and fold it and make 3D shapes. And so I first learned about this from the automotive and the aircraft industry. Aircraft use it to make panels and floor panels and things like this to make them extremely strong and extremely light. And automotive tends to use them to help design like crumple zones for when you get it to absorb energy in an accident, for example. One of the problems in wheelchairs is that most of them are made with tubes that are cut, bent, and then machined and then welded together, which reduces a lot of the ability to do customization. And then they're fairly expensive and time-consuming processes. And then you typically need a lot of different materials, so different size tubes and maybe different types of materials like between aluminum and titanium, sometimes composite, sometimes steel. I thought about this and thought this really would be cool if Kirigami could be used. Then you could create a process which we have filed for a patent for that basically is this Kirigami wheelchair design process. We create a 3D shape and then we actually use software that has some AI components to flatten that shape. Do another software that we use that takes it and then figures out how to take those flattened pieces and then we nest them together to cut them with a laser. Then we have to go the reverse process. We run some software. How do we take those flat pieces and bend them and attach them together so that they become a 3D shape again? What's exciting about it is because what's neat about Kirigami is it self-locks together. So in like a normal tubular wheelchair, you'd have to make these special jigs to hold things in place and then have very talented welders or robotic welders or some combination of human and robotic welders put them together, but it means that you really don't get customization. You get like a series, right? So there's some standard sizes. So it's like, 4 sizes fits all kind of thing. Well, with Kirigami, the things sort of self-lock together so you can literally make the chair either as a series or custom to each individual. The other really cool thing about it is it all works with flat sheets. You can choose whether they're going to be aluminum or steel or titanium, and theoretically it could also be composite material. So you can kind of optimize which material you want to use. So for strength and for weight, you don't need a lot of different materials. You don't need a lot of different tubing. It's just all made out of 1 or 2 flat sheets. And then when it's bent together, it locks together. What we've been doing in order to reduce the number of complex welds is we've been using the laser to pre-drill or pre-cut holes, and we rivet them together. A very Pittsburgh thing, right? We're a city of bridges that are all riveted together. The nice thing about that, it's pretty easy because if the holes line up, you just put the rivet in and pull the rivet gun and it's you do that. And so it also reduces the amount of labor and a lot of skill that the labor is needed. One, because the software does a lot of the hard work and the machines do a lot of the hard work. Most of the work is in the front end in the design. But the nice thing is we've done it what's called parametric design. So right now, as a matter of fact, we had a meeting this morning with one of my former students who's an occupational therapist in Brazil and our team and some people out in California, where we're looking like, can we make a high quality, affordable wheelchair for low and middle income countries? So Brazil is our test case. And the idea is that if you don't need a lot of complex equipment, high skill to put these together, then you can make really good wheelchairs. Might actually be something like an IKEA kit, not literally IKEA, but that concept that you could actually get the pieces and the tools in a kit and instructions and assemble it yourself. I'm not sure that's the avenue to go down yet, but the cool thing is that we're making an everyday wheelchair. We're making sort of a sports everyday wheelchair. That we're making a rugby wheelchair, a tennis wheelchair, a basketball wheelchair, and even a Nordic ski, a sitting Nordic ski. And that's cool because it's really, you get your dimensions, you tell us what you want to do. We run it through the software and it spits out the design. Well, not the design, it scales the design to you. And we just The rest is the patterns, the process is pretty much the same. And because we use these flexible manufacturing techniques like laser cutting and computer numerically controlled press brake, that you don't need a lot of tools. Those tools are flexible and they don't care whether it's making a rugby chair, an everyday chair, a racing chair, whatever. So you can just kind of you can have a very mixed line with all custom products. Or if you want to, if you're doing it for like a fleet, like a hospital or something like that, where you just want some standard sizes, you could just also run standard sizes. And you could run those standard sizes right along the line with custom sizes. And they look pretty cool. They have a little bit of a stealth fighter, stealth bomber look. Some people say a little bit of a sort of a gladiator look to them. It is also giving us some really cool features that we can do, because things like some people are adding on these front wheel power add-on units, they're like your scooters that you see people riding around, the electric scooters. You kind of put the front half of the scooter on a wheelchair, and it takes a manual wheelchair and makes it a motorized scooter. And usually on a tubular frame, you have to build sort of this complex, little bit heavy, awkward hardware to mount to it. With our process, we can just incorporate that right into the design.
I reckon that has something to do with the innovative philosophy and your rotational leadership, and that adds to a variety of different types of wheelchair design. So on that note, I am going to turn this to my co-interviewer, Shirley. Shirley, would you mind introducing yourself?
That's great. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, it's very great to speak with you, Dr. Cooper. My name is Shirley, and I'm participating today on behalf of ADAPT.legal. ADAPT is an organization that increases accessibility to everyone, to the IP profession, as well as intellectual property world, and been doing a lot of volunteer work with Ashley on various aspects of ADAPT. So it's great to be involved in the process. And also personally, myself, I've been a trained electrical engineer, computer scientist. I've also been writing patents for a really long time. So it's not every day. Again, I'm talking to somebody from the National Inventor Hall of Fame. I've spoken with a lot of distinguished engineers and written a lot of patents in my 17-ish year of career in writing patents, but this is the first time speaking with somebody from the Hall of Fame. So it's a pleasure to get to speak to you. Well, my first question is actually hopefully an easy one. Maybe it's a different patent from the Kirigami wheelchair, but you've got a lot of patents. Do you have a favorite one that you'd like to tell us about, or maybe the one that you're most proud of?
I don't have a favorite. That's like picking your favorite child or your favorite. I'm usually most passionate about the one I'm working on now, but that's just because it's, we're immediately in the midst of solving some problem. But what I can tell you is maybe I'll just tell you about the two patents that landed me in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. One of them is the ergonomic push rim. And so the idea was that for decades, for over 100 years, the first wheelchair push rims, that's the part that wraps around the wheel, attaches to the wheel to help propel a manual wheelchair, was basically based on wooden branches that you could trim and bend into a hoop. That turns out to be like about 5 inches to 3/4 of an inch in diameter. Oddly enough, even as the push rims became steel and aluminum, they kind of used that same concept of just making a tubular hoop. Nobody really gave thought to, was that the best interface for propelling a manual wheelchair? But then it started bothering me. Well, first it bothered me in the early 1980s with racing wheelchairs, and I was thinking, how do I go faster, and why is it this shape? So we varied size, and then I started playing around with different shapes. And then I was in my Ph.D. program, I learned that individuals that use wheelchairs developed had a pretty high incidence of carpal tunnel syndrome or rotator cuff injuries, so shoulder injuries, or elbow tendonitis. Elbow injuries are sometimes called tennis elbow. And I thought, wow, racing wheelchairs, athletes that push the racing wheelchairs, they push hundreds of miles a week or over 100 miles a week. They don't really have these injuries at any higher rate than people that only push a few miles a week. So there must be something to do with the ergonomics of the wheelchair. And so I started looking at how do you sit in the wheelchair and the push rim? And I developed a tool called the Smart Wheel, which allows us to study both wheelchair biomechanics and ergonomics, and is still in use today by labs around the world. And that led us to looking at ergonomic shapes. And that came out with 2 patents that are on the market as products. And the other cool thing is, as you probably know from your experience, you've done something right, that when your patents expire, other people start to create knockoff products. And there's also spin-off products. And then, of course, I can see our invention all over the world because of the commercial success and the subsequent success of the people who made what I want to call Me Too products, right? The other problem actually came about from a little less personal reason. The other patent was the the variable compliance joystick with compensation algorithms, which really came about when I was working in the clinic in the 1990s. At the time, the amplifiers on wheelchairs were analog amplifiers, and they were in the late 80s, 1990s. They were really hard to use. I'm dating myself a little bit, but my electrical engineering, I learned about microprocessors and microcontrollers and computers. I was probably part of the first sort of digital generation of electrical engineers. And I thought, well, this is kind of a perfect application, because that's basically what you try to do is it's a two motor controllers with an interface. I had some clients in the clinic that had both neurological and musculoskeletal, like cerebral palsy and spinal muscle atrophy and muscular dystrophy. And with analog controls, it was really, really hard to help get them to be able to drive effectively. And, so some of the people are like, Dr. Cooper, you're an electrical engineer. You got to help us, right? You should be able to solve this problem. And so I started the research with some graduate students then. And we did a lot of experiments. We had several grants, and there were some fits and starts. But eventually, the technology sort of caught up with what we were trying to do. And it turns out that we found out with a really cool joystick design. Probably the more critical part was we got rid of all these like plastic or wooden templates and these tuning resistors and all that, and did it all digitally. It was interesting. There was two things we learned from that was rather surprising. First was that we couldn't really license the technology. The VA pointed this out to me and said, Rory, if you license this technology, a lot of our veterans are only going to be able to drive whatever chair we license, whatever company we license this to. So we patented the technology and then realized that we had to basically make it available to all the controller manufacturers. I mean, of course, one of the points of a patent is to give one company an advantage over another, but since we weren't the manufacturer, we wanted to be the licensor, and because the VA is a purchaser and UPMC is a purchaser, my wife actually worked in the clinic. I ran the assistive technology clinic for Pitt and UPMC. It was like, oh, you've created a solution and a problem. So we decided to do a royalty-free license for any legitimate manufacturer. And then what that happened is it caught on so quickly that it just kind of exploded the number of people that could now use a power wheelchair by themselves. People that were like being pushed by others or using a scooter. But it was great. That technology is pretty much used on all power wheelchairs in the entire world, all the controllers. To me, it's just amazing to see, especially I've got the chance to see the whole transition, right? The people that would previously not had independent mobility who now have independent mobility, or people who are young people who don't even know that this was a problem at one time, are driving around independently because of the technology. So they're pretty exciting, but I'm really excited about our pneumatically powered wheelchair that's used in water parks, which allows people who use powered wheelchairs to participate in summer activities such as splash pads and water fights and go to pools and things like that. To go into beaches. The technologies that have changed people's lives are the ones that are, to me, my favorite ones. Our research is all based on working with clinicians and people with disabilities to identify problems or challenges they're facing, and then putting people together to work to try to come up with viable solutions.
And I'm very glad to hear that this life-changing technology landed with the patent rights that landed in your hands, somebody who believes in making other people's lives better so that you can control it. Had it gone to a company that was in there for profit and exclusivity, maybe it wouldn't have had such a big impact. So I'm glad that you had filed a patent and gotten that exclusivity yourself, and then being able to control that and make a huge impact on everybody's lives. My brother-in-law works in the assistive technology lab for Utah State. I can't wait to tell him about the fact that I spoke to an inventor of the technology, a digital control technology that goes into these joystick for motorized wheelchairs. So that's really really exciting. And I'm glad to hear about some of these really neat inventions. But this is kind of a related question. Looking back at your career, how do you see patents and intellectual property helping inventors like you actually make a real difference, right? So we talked a little bit about how that patent initially was a problem, but then later on enabled you to have control over, which wheelchair manufacturers, which are qualified and well vetted to be able to use that technology. Were there other examples of how these patents and intellectual property help you bring these technologies to market to make a real difference?
Well, certainly. I mean, what is really important for patents for me, like for a government agency and academic institution, is to have a little bit of control, right? So like with the controller work and the joystick work was that we could make sure that it wasn't captured by a single company and it could disrupt the whole market and perhaps even not be an optimal solution for the actual end users. The other advantage is it also makes it attractive for something to come to market. And one of my concerns, especially as an engineering researcher and research inventor, is that there's a marginal value to when we invent something that never leaves the laboratory or never leaves the university or never leaves the VA. And so patents make the invention more attractive to industry. And so we can then operate, initiate a license, or there are more and more students, at least I've noticed over the years, who are interested in more and more veterans too, who are interested in innovation and entrepreneurship and may want to take something that they worked on in school or something that they were part of a research study in and take that and make that a commercial product. And that's where licenses and patents are important as well. So in some cases, like the ergonomic push rims, that we did license it to a company. Fortunately, that company was an accessory company, so they sold their products to OEM manufacturers. So it was able to get on all the different wheelchairs, but that company was able to make a profit. And so that made that product come to market. Otherwise, it probably would have languished. I tried to avoid that with some of our technologies. So that's a really important part of the patent process. My experience with the patent process has actually been pretty positive, probably because we usually do a lot of research and we have working prototypes and data before we actually file for a patent. With the patent attorneys that the University of Pittsburgh and the VA work with, they tend to know that and they know us. We actually tend to work with just a couple of different attorneys. That helps us, I think, write better patents and stronger patents. In my experience, the examiners have been also, they kind of know that. My guess is I've never worked on the other side, but they probably do get to know the attorneys and the firms and probably get to know the inventors after a while and kind of who sort of knows what they're doing. Some people disagree. My experience with the patent office has been that people usually are trying to guide you to whether this is patentable or not, although I think I have a pretty good handle on that by now. But and sometimes we put stuff in the public domain. That's a perfectly viable solution, and that's totally appropriate.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of people don't think about that patents also serve the other public benefit of giving out that technology to the public domain as well. So, but it does sound like that patents have had a very beneficial impact in terms of products getting onto the market and business being spun off and being viable when there's a patent attached to a particular idea.
And that's essentially the purpose of the patent, right?
That's right. You mentioned students. At ADAPT, many of the members participate in a lot of pro bono activities to help young inventors get a patent, or sometimes we volunteer as judges for invention conventions with K through 12 students. Do you have any tips that we can pass along to these young inventors that we work with who want to create solutions that can make a positive impact?
Sure. Actually, I was last week, I went to one of the invention conventions in Columbus. I'll be going to the National Invention Convention in Dearborn, Michigan in a few weeks. I get the privilege of being either meet the Hall of Fame inventor, and so sort of a minor celebrity, sometimes to be a judge, which is like on Saturday, I was so-called shark. That's a little interesting, but some of the kids just blow me away, but they're amazing. What they were able to do. An amazing young man who was working on a revolutionary new drivetrain for a prosthetic arm, and he was in 11th grade. And it's like making me shake my head and say, that's pretty. And he taught himself a lot of engineering and physics. He must be a handful to his teachers because he's probably already doing graduate level work in the 11th grade. So, although I've had a couple of those as students that I've had a 12-year-old PhD student, a 16-year-old PhD student. So they do come at you once in a while. So this is kind of the advice I give when I go to the invention question. They ask me to speak. I say, if the little kids, the sort of the kindergarten to third grade, try to solve a problem for your pet. Sort of fourth, fifth, sixth graders, I'd say try to solve a problem for your home or for your grandparents or your parents or brother or sister. In middle school, I say work on something for your school or your church or your community. And then when you get into high school, then maybe, if you got some experience, you've been at this for all, let's try to solve a bigger problem. I was at the invention convention a couple of years ago, and I was really impressed. These young people had come up with an add-on to the muffler that included a strain of algae that basically took in carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, and you could put it on the end. They had convinced MIT to let them do some tests on a vehicle in their lab, and they wanted to put it on their mom's car. Their mom was a little skeptical at first, so she let them put it on their lawnmower. And once they got the MIT testing, they drove around in their mom's car with this thing on there, and it did actually have a statistically significant reduction and probably a meaningful destruction in carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide emissions. And they had done a really nice job too of machining this and making the product and doing the science behind it. And it was really, to me, really promising and really hopeful. Some of the young people, when they get to high school, they're super bright. If they've got good teachers that kind of let them go. I do some work with the patent office and their educational programs too, where they have the educational curriculum for middle school and high school. Those young people also, the ones that do well, they really dig into it. They find a problem. They work with the person. I'm really believe in this participatory action design and engineering. So you solve it's got to be a real person working with them and integrate them into the team and work to solve a problem. And there's some really amazing wants to do that. So my view is a little bit skewed because I tend to see them at these high-level competitions. And so they're really, although I have done some of the invention conventions, I'm not the invention conventions, National Inventors Hall of Fame camps. So you got the kids there, and they're just starting out, right? One thing I learned there is I probably would not be a good grammar school or primary school teacher because I don't have that kind of energy anymore. Those kids are high energy. They're also just a huge amount of fun, and they have an amazing curriculum that they provide. I think on the lawyer side, it's really probably more coaching, right? What is it? What do claims look like? What are dependent claims? When is it best to patent? What type of patent? Is it a utility patent? Is it a design patent? Is it a process patent? And then also teaching people how to do patent searches and also scientific literature searches. One thing I always caution people about is be careful when you do literature searches that you look at the default search window, because a lot of times people only do a search for the last 5 years or the last 10 years. So one of my common pieces of advice that I give is that there were smart people even 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Not all the smart people were born in the last 15, 20, last 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. Make sure you look back, because what you're trying to solve may actually have been solved some time ago but forgotten. Or you can build on something that somebody might have thought of, but it was too far ahead of its time. The technology was too far ahead of its time. And now might be the right time. Or the problem that they recognized, society at large did not recognize, now we recognize that problem and go back and solve it. So it's basically open up your aperture for your time window for when you also go back and look at what's been done in both the scientific literature and the patent filings.
That makes a lot of sense. At ADAPT, one of the missions we have is to ensure that all individuals have access to resources, guidance, opportunities in the field of intellectual property. To many innovators, even if they have been working in the industry for a long time, getting a patent seems like an attainable goal. What are your thoughts on making innovation and participating in the patent system more inclusive, accessible, and how can we encourage more accessibility to everyone and debiasing the system, in your opinion?
In my opinion, there's sort of two hurdles. One of them is sort of a mental block about filing a patent, how complex it is and the language you use. And that's just takes some education, getting people out there and explaining what are the different types of patents and also how to write processes. Although I'll be honest, I think AI is going to level that playing field quite a bit. Writing claims and invention disclosure and probably even a provisional patent seems like a perfect target for generative AI. And then the other part of it is the cost barriers, both the attorney costs and the patent filing costs. Not much you can do about patent filing costs, but if there's, at least for young inventors or first-time inventors, having more access to pro bono education and maybe pro bono filing assistance, I think those are, if we can get and I think that problem is it seems like there's enough attorneys that want to do that. I've had the opportunity to speak with a number of organizations, but people just aren't aware. They don't know about them.
Those are big hurdles to overcome because filing a patent certainly is not cheap. Well, I think that concludes my portion. So back to Ashley for closing.
Well, thank you so much. For those people who wanted to help advance the cost of HERL, Dr. Cooper, would you mind sharing with us what we can actually do to help?
Well, you can always contact Institutional Advancement at the University of Pittsburgh and let them know that you'd like to support HERL. And you can always find more information about HERL at our website, HERL.pitt.edu, as well as on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook.
All of this information will be on show notes, so people can actually find it easy to help advance the cause. And thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Thank you.
Take care.